Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Shuttle V2 by AstroRC, and while this is a fairly unique design and split level, we've seen that before in the past. What's probably more unique is the fact that it's inverted on the rear motors, and it also has a unique design when it comes to the dampening that we oftentimes see in our new HD systems. And it is a unique design, and it is a somewhat unique experience. But there's a lot to discuss about the construction of such a unique design. The motors are 1404 4500 kV. Props are HQ 3x3x3 props. And I broke several during my flight times, and they all kind of broke right here at the hub. One just exploded. I don't even have the broken prop anymore. The flight controller is kind of listed as a generic F405 40 amp ESC. It does have a capacitor of 25 volts, 220 microfarads, soldered directly onto the battery pads of the ESC. It does have this unique board between the layers that does have LEDs around it, and the receiver is soldered to pins on this board. We'll look at that more after the flight. Comes in a couple different versions. Comes without a video system and camera, but it also comes in analog, and it listed as DJI 04. Do note that it's the 04, or what we call the 04 Lite, but they have pictures that look like it's with the 04 Pro. We do have rubber dampening here at the rear, as well as in the front. This 3D print lifts off, so you have access to the USB port, but the binding button underneath, which you can get to, but you've got to use some sort of poker to get down through all these different levels. 3D prints at the lower half as well as the upper half, and that 3D print up here extends all the way back here. This is a separate print. Video system is 3D print. Antenna holders a 3D print, as well as this holder. XT30 for your battery connection. The battery mount as they have it is kind of this loop design. Of course, if you have the right size of strap, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that, but to get it down on the battery pad, you're going to kind of have to. It comes with two different battery straps. The shorter one that I have mounted to is more appropriate for smaller packs like 650s and 720s, where if you wanted to fly larger packs like 850 or larger, they have this larger 250 millimeter strap. It does come with a few extra 3D prints, and yeah, it came like this, kind of sloppy with the support still attached, and this piece is still attached to this other one. It also comes with this AstroRC Velcro patch, and kind of a manual that looks to be mainly in Chinese or a language that I don't read. And it does come with a micro USB cable. It weighs just about 178 grams flat. I did flight testing for flat cruisy flight with these two sizes of batteries, but I flew the faster flight, which we're going to focus on the 650s. With that 930 milliamp battery, it comes in at 278.23 grams. With the 650, it's under 250 gram limit at 247.91 grams. Carbon fiber plates look to be 4 millimeters thick on both the front and back. They have that gap in the arms. The thinner gap is 3 millimeters thick. Wider gap is 6 millimeters thick. The gap between the top and the bottom arms looks to be 31 millimeters in height. We're going to focus on the faster flight. As I said, you can see in the OSD, I'm going to pop in and I'm going to do some power adjustments so that the low voltage warning doesn't bother us quite so much. And this isn't the first time I've changed that particular setting. I went through a series of flights and I kept changing the setting to where, I could fly the 650, because with this particular quad, flying it with an 850 or bigger, you could really start to feel that weight, which would be more appropriate for that size of battery in a larger space. My space, while sizable for a yard, it's not sizable when it comes to, carrying a lot of weight and trying to do a lot of relatively tight turns, especially when I do some figure eights around the outdoor living space or the trees that we have over here on this side of the yard. My first few flights, this did feel very twitchy, and I don't know, I hedge to say it's actually the quad, because I do struggle to fly the 04 or 04 Lite. Just that smaller field of view, it makes it much more difficult. I feel I have to concentrate, and it's less organic. And we see that wobble that we go zero throttle, so we full throttle up, and then we nose over real quickly so we can get that kind of pull away from the earth at zero throttle with our nose down. And we have a little bit of wobble. That's something that we're seeing, I think, far too much from all the manufacturers. Most of the manufacturers are getting it wrong somehow when it comes to their PID tune, and I don't think that they actually test that particular maneuver. And I feel ranty about it, but that's not really my style. But we're just seeing it so frequently, and some of these quads that I get for review have footage on them from the manufacturer, and from that footage that I have, I can tell that they're not flying these very aggressively. So I think the tune in some of these cases where we see that wobble, it might be a basic black box tune. Maybe they flight test it a little bit just to make sure it's okay, but they're certainly not, freestyling this to much degree. I can say that there are other companies, smaller companies, that in my opinion do a better job of PID tune. There are a few larger companies that are doing pretty good, but we have seen, I think, at least 4 different manufacturers that all suffer from that same flaw. As I started this flight with, it felt twitchy, but again, I don't know if that is just me and not being adept at that 04 field of view. It feels like you're jumping back to a 90-degree field of view with analog. With those of you that experienced that, it was real narrow. Used to be the thought that for racing purposes that was good because it kept you more focused. But as times change, we've gone to a wider and wider field of view in just about all our video systems. As far as how it flew outside of that potential twitchiness, it flies like a normal 3-inch for the most part, a little bit on the heavy side. Heavy can be a decent thing if you want that fling or flick, so when you're trying to carry the quad over an object, such as in power loops without using the throttle, that extra weight helps you kind of clear an item when you're not on the throttle to be able to get over it for easily, so it'll allow you to throw it farther than something that's lighter. You might consider the lighter stuff more toothpick-like. This does have a buzzer on it. I did not highlight that in the quick specs. Some people really enjoy that because it's something that we don't see very often. That buzzer is a part of the PCB that comes between the stack. And I think that PCB between the stack is something that we have to discuss quite a bit further. I had my own experience with it, and then I have my additional thoughts about having that in there. It does create an element of visual impact because of the LEDs that they did install on there. The receiver comes soldered on pins to that board, so it's something else to be aware of, that replacing the receiver isn't going to be exactly easy, especially if you're not one that likes to solder. Going to be even more of a stretch, but we'll discuss those things back at the desk. The flight has ended on that 650 milliamp battery with those voltage adjustments. I got 3 minutes and 42 seconds of that style of flight, and 348 on the average cell, coming up to 349. Just about nailed that ending voltage, so good thing I changed that warning voltage before that flight started, eh? Dialing back the clock a bit, this is back when I first got it. I always do my flight testing as far as flat, cruisy, exploratory sort of flight first. This is on the 930 milliamp battery. It goes on for a good long time, but we're just going to look at a sample of that. This is, of course, in the evening. As you saw there, the sun is relatively low, but it's not exactly after work time. It's probably about 4:40 this time of year. It's winter time here in the United States. The temperatures have changed, but in this flight it was actually relatively reasonable, 57 degrees and 10 miles an hour. The previous flight, the faster flight, was more current and it was colder, 45. So better than it has been some of the days that I've had quads out flying, and only 9 miles an hour. As far as the real feel from the weather service, it said it felt like 40 degrees, even though the actual temperature was 40 degrees. Again, 9 miles per hour. That was all in the faster flight. This one, it's 57 and 10 miles an hour. But you can see we've gone from the DVR view, which is my normal starting point, and then we transition over into the onboard storage review. Just to look at seeing how smooth the video is. The rubber dampening in this particular case, it felt fairly stiff. I did have this apart. I had to have it apart in order to get everything working normally, and that's something that we can talk about a bit back at the desk. So maybe I tightened things a little bit, but I tightened to where I thought it, like with the nuts, the locking nuts, if you're not in that locking mechanism, it's actually like a softer plastic surface within the nut. Then the locking nuts aren't really doing their job and you're subject to vibration. So I tightened things down just enough to get that locking nut, and there goes Mr. Squirrel, in effect, so it wouldn't rattle loose on me. And it did feel like the vibration dampening was pretty stiff or firm at that point. I kind of showed that when we were looking at the quick specs back at the beginning of the video of how much compression, although you can't really tell how much force I have to give it. I'll just tell you it took more force than it does for other dampening, so I'm not sure how much vibration dampening that is doing, or if it's doing any at all. Maybe it's just right. Maybe it doesn't need it unless it's dramatic. I said during the quick specs that I broke quite a few props. I think I broke 3 props, and they all kind of broke at the hub, which is a little bit comical because the props are HQ durable props. Now maybe that had something to do with the temperature, maybe it had something to do with my crash style, but one just exploded to where I just had the prop mounting screws left in the motor and the prop was all the way gone. The other two, I had one that I was able to pull off of the desk and keep track of. I kind of showed you that one. There was another broken prop, which I can't recall what happened, but I'm pretty certain because the notes indicate that they all broke at the hub. Not a single prop broke with a blade. I do have a bent blade on a prop that's still on the quad and that I was using in the faster flight. But that's a pretty good 3-minute sample of the slower flight as well as a full pack on the freestyle faster sort of flying. The first thing I want to look at is that internal PCB board. And you can see it's printed right here with the AstroRC, and we have LEDs around each side, and then we also have LEDs. I think there's just one. No, there's none on these sides, but there are some around the back near the standoffs. Obviously, these standoffs are more sizable. I think those are M3 versus these are M2s around the other sides. And I think that was smart because you do have that, I think it was what, a 31 millimeter separation between the lower plate and the upper plate. So you need quite a bit of metal to firm that up. What you can't see in this image, and we'll look at it here in just a minute, is this is the receiver, and this board that has the buzzer and the connector that we have to have connects to pins back here in the back, and those pins are soldered to the receiver. So it's going to complicate replacing the receiver. They did a nice job of keeping everything tidy. You can see the shrink wrap in here and a coil for the antenna to make sure you don't have just wires just hanging out loose. So I initially set it up and everything was normal, and I went out to fly it and my receiver wouldn't come on. I could see that the receiver didn't have any lights on it. Matter of fact, the entire board did not have any lights on. So somewhere between me setting it up and not having it apart, just normal setup, plug in USB, bind receiver, that sort of stuff, I get the video bound to my goggles. This connector squeaked out a little bit somehow. So I found that I just pressed that back in a little bit. I think if it were to be something I had to go back and visit again, I would put a thin layer of some sort of removal type of glue, like E6000 or Welders, if you can find any of that anymore, just to strip in there to keep that in there, because it is kind of a process to get to this board. Another thing about this board is obviously we have traces that carry voltage to all the different components, and it all comes through this connector. So if you break these boards in critical places, you could be out a feature or function, and this board does come between the two plates. So that introduces an extra fault point that we don't have in a more traditional design. I'm not sure if you could design, well, you could definitely design without this board. It probably would just make things a little less clean as far as assembly goes. This plug down here just goes off to our video system, the VTX specifically, which I don't have an issue with. That's very, very common nowadays, but this is soldered through the board and the various pins. And then this connector, it did shake loose between the point that I got everything set up and ready to fly and then my first flight outside, just no receiver. So I had to take it all apart. I did have the foresight, thankfully, to taking at least this picture in order to show you and share that experience. So back here at the website, this is the manufacturer's website, astrorc.net. You can see the pictures do reflect pretty accurately. It has the 0404 light in here. And then as we scroll down, you see it has pictures that have what appear to be an 04 Pro in them. Down along this panel, more 04 Pros, and then they show you how this center section, which because I had to have this out, that meant dealing with the grommets. That wasn't a whole lot of fun, but got it done, I guess. They do also have a 3.6-inch version if you are interested in something larger, but I wanted to get down here to the bottom. It's interesting, they have all black, but in the assembled version, that's yellow. This board here is what we're kind of highlighting in my own picture, but if we go over to this tab, this can kind of show you, it's not great, but this shows you the pins across the board, then also gives you a clear picture of the LEDs all the way around. I wanted to make sure to share that with you because, again, if you break the board in this area back here, then this is likely going to, at least the tail section, lose power, and then you're going to have an issue of replacing your receiver. That's going to have to probably come right off the flight controller, so that'll mean taking this board out and soldering your new receiver directly to the board. This isn't something we actually dive into all that much, but because this has this middle component, which is part of the unique design, I thought it was worth highlighting and maybe even stressing. If we go over to the Banggood website, I wanted to highlight this again because the camera itself, when I told Banggood I was interested in this because it is so unique, I probably should have just gotten the analog version, but it showed it with these pictures, and then it said DJI 04, but up here it says the 04 Lite. It does not come with an 04 Pro, so despite the pictures that you may find of this, it does not come natively with the 04 Pro. Banggood does not offer it without a camera and video system, so you can't get it without and then plug your own in. As you can here back on the manufacturer's website, you see it has the plug and play version, which doesn't come with a video system. You can also get it without a receiver. You can get it in analog, whereas Banggood only offers as an analog and 04 Lite. If we go down here a little bit further on the Banggood page, you do see where it talks about supporting the DJI 03 and 04. Canex Vista is walk snail, avatar, as well as analog. So I presume that you'd be able to get this and put in analog or HD0 on your own if you get it without. So you have a special VTX or something. You'd have got that fairly wide cage that's got to be 20 millimeters wide that you can put that in, because this is 20 by 20 right there. So in the faster flight, do note that if it sounded a little bit weird, I have a turned down prop here that I was flying with that. I did not notice that, and it didn't actually oddly. Usually when I'm flying and I have a prop that's bent like this, just ever so slightly, or even the pitch off a little bit, I can usually hear it. And then I kind of just line up my props. I kind of line them up like so that I can see that. But do know that if you heard a weird prop noise, that's our little guy causing that weird prop noise. I need to get that all fixed up. I mentioned it in the quick specs, but I'm not a fan of this battery strap style. It's just tedious getting your batteries in and out. I do like the fact that they have the XT30 that's kind of mounted down here, so you don't have to worry about your props, anything getting into your props from your battery. So you've got it kind of securely mounted there. It means it doesn't necessarily sit really flat on a table or something like that. You can get it to sit flat, but that's going to depend upon your battery and your buckle position when you strap it down. You know, if the buckle's over on the side, it'll probably be much more likely to sit flat if that's important to you. They do have my motor wire tape, which is actually identical. This is the one I had to remove the motor wire tape from the top side, and you can see here on the bottom side they have that same sort of tape. It's not fabric tape, it's what's it called? Acetate tape, I think it's called. So they are doing that, which keeps our motor wires down and keeps them from getting in. Again, when my experience taking things apart, I did find it a little bit tedious getting things quite back together just like they had it. There's so many pieces to this. I had to get all the way down to, well, I didn't have to, but I did get all the way down to the flight controller, so I had to kind of move pieces around and unscrew them from the top and the bottom, which kind of highlighted when you're working on this sort of design, it has extra steps that you just don't have with a traditional sort of flat style design. Of course, they have this center section here, which I know you won't be able to see this, but it does take a fair bit of force to get that to go up and down. These are lock nuts here on the top, and then the nuts are up here on the bottom side, or actually the top side there, and then the bottom side here. But, you know, it works. I don't know if it was necessary or not. You know, the only way to tell would be to just hunker this down so much to where it can't possibly vibrate and test it out that way. You know, if you've got a good enough tune on quads, it shouldn't necessarily mean anything or be needed. It is fairly unique design. I did struggle to bind the VTX to figure out a way, and I highlighted this in the quick specs, and I wanted to show you that. But if you go right down through this hole, which is really difficult to show in this camera, you can hit the bind button with, say, a pencil or some sort of toothpick or something that's not conductive is what I would suggest, to push that bind button so you can get it bound to your goggles. I think I may have forgotten to give you the flight times on the slower flight times. 10 minutes and 10 seconds on the 930 and 6 minutes and 40 seconds on the 650. That's in more of a flat exploratory sort of style for a flight time. I didn't do as much of that sort of battery flight time testing as I normally do because my weather, this time of year, I'm just not going to be able to sit out there and have an hour consistent of flying. I have to pop back inside and get my hands warmed up or get my body warmed up as I start to eventually get acclimated to the colder temperatures we're going to have over the next couple of months. So there'll be less of that over this period of time. I'm going to try to do some as I did in this particular case, but there just won't be as much as in the warmer months because it's not as much fun to sit out there and fly. Some people have asked me why I don't sit in the house and fly. And that is because I try to introduce as few variables as possible when it comes to reviews. So if you're looking at a flight that is in the wintertime versus in the nicer, spring, summer times, you won't necessarily have the introduction of variables. That's why when I fly faster, I don't use gloves, even though I have heated gloves, because I feel like it's important to try to be as consistent as possible, and I just can't be as consistent with those gloves, even with the finger holes out on them. I've tried many times. I just can't, and I'm not comfortable introducing that variable to what you could be basing your money on. Yeah, could I sit outside? Could I sit inside and possibly impact the reception or just how I fly because of my senses, because I can't hear the quad? Those are variables I'm just not willing to introduce so that people can actually decide much more clearer whether it's something that they're interested in at all or otherwise. There will be a link to the Shuttle V2 from AstroRC down in the video description if you are interested. I don't see where Banggood offers just the frame if you want to build it up on your own, but if I can find that, I will. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise about the Shuttle V2, please let me know down in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.